Hi, thank you for coming out this afternoon. My name is Corinne Ernie. I'm the Chief Curator here at the Parrish. And we have a lot to celebrate today. We're celebrating our current exhibition, Regeneration, Long Island's History of Ecological Art and Care. We're also celebrating Earth Day and Robert Rauschenberg's centennial. So when we started thinking about an exhibition on ecology, we decided to focus on this very place because we figured while the problems or the issues with environment are global, the action and the care needs to be local. So we invited 11 artists. They're between 30 and 93 years old, so we have a huge intergenerational group who have strong ties to Long Island and New York, and who approach issues of rising sea levels, depleted natural habitats, and ocean pollution from a place of curiosity, hope, and shared responsibility. We also feel very honored that this exhibition resonated with the Robert Rauschenberg Foundation, who supported the show. I want to thank the other supporters of this exhibition, Lois Whitman Hess and Elliot Hess, the Robert David Lyon Gardner Foundation, and Sandy and Stephen Perlbinder. And thank you for being here today. Thank you. Takes a village. So today's conversation is with Helen Sue. She is the Associate Curator for Research at the Robert Rauschenberg Foundation, and Regeneration artist Scott Bluedorn, raise your hand, Jeremy Dennis, and Sasha Fishman, who are going to be on screen, Tucker Marder. Thank you. And it's moderated by Scout Hutchinson, the Flag Art Foundation Associate Curator of Contemporary Art here at the Parrish, and she is also the main brainchild of this exhibition. We worked on this tirelessly together. I would like to mention the other artists who are in the exhibition, Maya Lin, Mamoun Nukumanu, Randy Renate, whom you may have seen as you walked in making this beautiful sculpture outside. And she will be talking on May 2nd, so please come back. Cindy Pease Rowe, Sarah Seastream, who is actually from the Hanis Coast tribe on the West Coast and collaborated with the Shinnecock kelp farmers. And those artists and the Shinnecock kelp farmers will be speaking on May 24th. So all of these programs are up on our website. Please come back. And also Alan Sonfist and Michelle Stewart. I also want to mention that Regeneration is part of the museum's 250th Life, Liberty, and the Pursuit of Happiness, which is a year-long program organized in response to the United States' 250th anniversary to reflect on the nation's history and founding values. And this particular exhibition explores our responsibility to the various forms of life that sustain us. And you're all welcome to have join us for the reception afterwards, right outside here on the lobby. And Scout, please take it away. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Corinne. I'm not going to say too much, only to just get us started here and say thank you all for being here with us today. I'm very happy to be here with Helen and 4 of our wonderful Regeneration artists, Scott, Tucker, and we have Sasha and Jeremy joining us on Zoom today. So we will start with presentations from each of our panelists that will last about 5 to 6 minutes. We'll move into a discussion between the 6 of us, and then we'll move on to audience Q&A if we have a few minutes at the end of the program. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Helen Sue.
Hello. There we go. Thank you. Thank you so much. The Robert Rauschenberg Foundation is thrilled to support Regeneration here at the Parrish during the Artist Centenary. The organizing principle for this exhibition resonates with Rauschenberg's lifelong commitment to environmentalism and ecological conservation. By 1970, against all odds and expectations, courting controversy along the way, Rauschenberg had achieved blue chip status as an artist. He readily agreed to design the poster for the inaugural Earth Day, instrumentalizing his art, and at this time his name, to raise funds for the American Environment Foundation through sales of this print. To sweeten the deal, perhaps, in a bed of collaged photographs provided by the Sierra Club, Rauschenberg lodged one of the signature images from his highly celebrated silkscreen painting series of 1962 to 64, the body of work that arguably gained him his reputation. We see the bald eagle flitting across 3 silkscreen paintings, Windward, Kite, and Tracer. It recurs in this untitled work of 1964-65 that hung above Rauschenberg's own bed in his Broadway studio. In the Earth Day poster, the eagle is deployed with Rauschenberg's classic multivalence. It is, at that time, an endangered species, an autographic image, a metonym for painting, among myriad possibilities. The work is also Rauschenberg playing the game of big philanthropy. Here you see the Earth Day poster at left in the landmark 1970 exhibition titled Information, a survey of conceptual art, where viewers were invited to or pressed into various tasks and activities. Without conflating conceptual art with political engagement, its forms, strategies, and tactics often assumed a critical bent. Audiences were induced into new dynamics that actually surfaced latent potentials that were already embedded in the aesthetic encounter, especially one that cultivated public discourse. I'm going to skip over this slide more to say that this is a petition to bring up the idea that this was a form that was brought into the aesthetic of conceptual art, and in fact, Rauschenberg was a signatory, but in the interest of time, we will move on. By the time Rauschenberg's Mud Muse premiered in the Art and Technology exhibition at the Los Angeles County Museum of Art in 1971, the commingling, if not infiltration, of politics and art had reached a fever pitch. The Art and Technology program raised the stakes by partnering artists with corporations to create works. Techno-optimism was sobered by relentless virtue checking, with escalating consciousness and criticism of the military-industrial complex. Whether or not this was intended by the organizers, it emerged as a resounding takeaway. At the time panned as a multi-million-dollar boondoggle, Rauschenberg embraced the quiet part. Wasting time and resources was the point, an exquisite sabotage that subverted capitalist technocracy. After all, Rauschenberg's collaboration with the Teledyne Corporation, involved with aviation and electronics, including developing equipment for supersonic drones, resulted in a large vat of mud. To be sure, one that bubbled in response to a soundtrack, but hardly an example of useful technology. Mud Muse upended conventions of propriety and decorousness in a museum setting. The rational geometry of its form burps, spits, and dribbles. There's a splash zone around its perimeter. Minimalist sculpture in the key of indigestion. While inspired by the paint pots in Yellowstone National Park, Rauschenberg conscripted technology to mimic an ancient natural phenomenon. The material, matter really, especially in 1971, evoked the rain-soaked Woodstock Festival of 1969, as well as counterculture gone awry at the end of that year with the muddy Rolling Stones concert at the Altamont Speedway. Mud Muse also sits in the shadow of the Vietnam War and the threat of being bombed back into the Stone Age, uttered in 1965 by Curtis LeMay, a general of the United States Air Force. I never imagined this would be called back in earnest by an American president. Rauschenberg distilled his project as, quote, pure waste, sensualism, utilizing a pretty sophisticated technology, end quote. The audio you're about to hear is from 1971, produced for Pacifica, Southern California Public Radio. The bad mix syncs with Rauschenberg's own reticence to speak about his work while highlighting the audio component of Mud Muse, hence the tech tower in the back corner, sound that is otherwise lost in the photo documentation. The track that activates the compressed air jets that stud the bottom of the vat is a recording of the bubbling vat, a reflexive feedback loop. Rauschenberg emphasizes the creaturely quality of this machinic work, referring to its digestive system, and the special care that temperamental technology requires. The artist marvels, quote, it just sits there listening to itself, and along with it, tells itself what to do.
And we, unfortunately, recorded its action. It's runs on its own song. The dreams, somebody plays its own advanced digestive system, and it just sits there listening to itself and doing what it tells itself to do.
I was down there a moment ago watching people coming in, and people were standing around with great delight, and several were going and feeling the mud.
They're feeling it
Yeah.
and smelling it. And last night we had the opening, and I came in this morning still worried about it because I don't know, technology is so uncontrollable, and so many things can happen that I don't understand with it. And so I was very concerned about if everything was still on and operating. And people had written notes to me.
Oh, really?
And,
The notes in mud that Rauschenberg appreciated were actually scrawled on the gallery walls. One institution's vandalism is another artist's delight. Yet one more subversive gesture occasioned by the artwork. Artist Miriam Shapiro received the message upon visiting art and technology with her students. Quote, "We all thought it was the best piece in the show. It was fun, artful, artless, and echoed the primordial past in reminding us of the irony of technology," end quote. Mudmuse leads us back to Earth Day via the Whole Earth catalog, launched in 1968 as the mail-order emporium for the counterculture, replete with indigenous techniques, Eastern philosophies, and all manner of gizmos, gadgets, hacks, and wonders spanning womb to tomb. Its combination message board, information sharing, networked sociality, and funk commerce anticipate the internet. On the left, Louis Elmore, Teledyne's director of special programs, writes to Rauschenberg about sourcing various parts for the project. He ends with, "Have been studying the Whole Earth catalog, just in case." Even big business was paying attention. The last Whole Earth catalog of 1971 lived in Rauschenberg's own library and may well have been consulted to outfit his studio and newly founded print shop in Captiva, Florida, where he had relocated from New York the previous year. The catalog declared in its statement of purpose, quote, "We are as gods and might as well get good at it. So far, remotely done power and glory, as via government, big business, formal education, church, has succeeded to point where gross defects obscure actual gains. In response to this dilemma and to these gains, a realm of intimate personal power is developing. Power of the individual to conduct his own education, find his own inspiration, shape his own environment, and share his adventure with whoever is interested," end quote. An expression at once belated and premature, to be approached with the deep ambivalence that Rauschenberg experienced with technology. Our current circumstances are inscribed with this attitude as an entire cohort of early technologists, Apple founder Steve Jobs, chief among them, was informed, if not inspired by, the Whole Earth catalog and its visionary founder, Stuart Brand. The last Whole Earth catalog published poet Wendell Berry's keynote Earth Day address, Think Little, which contains this passage, quote, "If we are to hope to correct our abuses of each other and of other races and of our land, and if our effort to correct these abuses is to be more than a political fad that will in the long run be only another form of abuse, then we are going to have to go far beyond public protest and political action. We are going to have to rebuild the substance and the integrity of private life in this country. We are going to have to gather up the fragments of knowledge and responsibility that we have parceled out to the bureaus and the corporations and the specialists. And we're going to have to put those fragments back together again in our own minds and in our families and households and neighborhoods," end quote. This is possibly the more radical proposition, as well as a slower burn and fugitive assignment, extended by Rauschenberg's artwork as well, modeled in combining, assembling, and constructing methods centered on abandoned commodities and materials. I do have 2 more slides, but in the interest of letting the other artists have their time as well, just to know that his commitment to environmental causes extended throughout his life. He participated in the Highway Poster Project in 1972, and 20 years later, he Yeah. He designed materials for the United Nations Earth Summit. And with that, I will pass the mic.
Thank you so much, Helen. So now we're going to hear from Jeremy Dennis, who is on Zoom. And Jeremy, you are just going to say to me when you want the next slide, which I will start here for you.
Oh, wonderful. Hope you can hear me well. Sorry I can't be there in person. I'm in Virginia right now. But again, my name is Jeremy Dennis. I'm an artist, photographer from the Shinnecock Indian Nation in Southampton, New York. First, want to thank Robert Rauschenberg Foundation and the Parrish Art Museum for supporting my involvement in the show and on this panel. My work is all about bringing our perspective back into a story that really has spent 250 years leaving Shinnecock and other tribal nations out. So Scott, we can go to the next slide. This is a project I started in 2016. It's called On This Site, and it's a survey of Long Island's indigenous cultural landscape. So if you visit the website, you're greeted by a map of the 13 original tribal communities. And land is so important, land and preservation, because of course the land isn't just space to be exploited and sold. It's part of our identity. Even though Shinnecock is self-governing, you really can't have a political body without a home base. Next slide, please. And so a lot of the work I've been doing since 2016 is researching. I don't do firsthand research, but my big role and maybe liberty as an artist is being able to type up a lot of these documents, put them online for free with reference, and really granting everyone the right to know the story of this place we call home on Long Island. Next slide. And so this is just one of over 400 examples of traditional place names on the island. This is from the Algonquin language, which Stony Brook University has a wonderful class revitalizing the language. But for the most part, many of these place names describe natural resources, foods, materials, and so on. Next slide, please. And so despite this abundance and knowledge, so much that I came across, there is this heavy weight growing up here, just this idea that you never see yourself reflected in the world around you. When you look at the books and the news, it's almost as if you're being told you don't exist and never existed. Next slide, please. This is sort of the collection of documents that I've come across, and really it's so much work to do. It's just scratching the surface, what you see on the website. But when you are in Southampton or on the East End, unfortunately, usually throughout the year, the only way you can get a glimpse or hint that Native people were both once here and still here is looking at the garbage cans throughout the town. And so garbage cans, of course, aren't something to marvel at. They're not something to notice or admire. And so through my art, it's a way to reverse that. Next slide, please. These are also some of the selections that I brought out, just reinforcing this idea that invisibility is an intentional tool. And why is invisibility such a harmful tool? If non-Native people don't see us, Shinnecock people, as being contemporary, living people, then our rights are devalued. We're not able to practice our rights. And next slide, please. And that's what brings us to almost the works that are in the Parrish as part of the Regeneration show. These works were inspired by the fact that 3,000 years ago, our ancestors didn't use tombstones or grave markers. We chose hilltops because we knew they would just naturally be preserved. This is the project site that started it all. It's called Sugarloaf Hill. And in 1990, the site was unfortunately destroyed. And 30 years later, we finally got it purchased and preserved. Next slide, please. And so there's only perhaps 3 known sites like this. For the most part, many of them have been disturbed. And Sugarloaf Hill is the southernmost star that I added to this map by David Martine. Next slide, please. And so really in 2018, the most recent human remains were discovered in the Shinnecock Hills. Next slide, please. Ironically, we were asked as Shinnecock Nation to fundraise in order to preserve this site. And for those who don't know, in 1859, our land was seized from us without compensation. And then in 2021, we were asked again by one of the wealthiest townships to fundraise to preserve something. And so this is just the reality that we have to live in every day, being invisible, having low income, and being asked to overcome these odds. Next slide, please. This is where Shinnecock Hills, the landscape that all of this is taking place. And I added a green rectangle where we are today. Next slide. And that brings us through to the Sacredness of Hills series. So Scout, you can just go forward for a couple since people will see it in the show. We'll go to the next one. And really, when I look at this body of work, it is all about protecting cemeteries and sacred sites, but that goes hand in hand with ecological protection as well. Next slide, please. This one was inspired by my Aunt Doreen, who's also a Shinnecock tribal member, standing in front of the device itself. Next slide. Again, my mother, Denise, my Aunt Darlene. This was in 2010 when we gained federal recognition, and this whole process was in order to regain our sacred hills. Next slide. This is just a resource if you'd like to learn more about being an ally. Next slide. This is the oldest ever group photo of Shinnecock people ever created on the Shinnecock Hills. And a lot of the work I'm trying to do is to undo this narrative of a vanished people. Next slide, please, Scout. This should be the last one. This is the to-do list for the project. So a lot of it is trying to take something invisible and rendering it visible. And just this map alone shows the wealth of work that has to be done. So thank you all for listening. Sorry I went over a little bit.
Okay, so I'm going to pass the mic off to Scott Bluedorn.
Okay. Hello, and thank you so much to the Parrish. This show really means a lot to me, so it's great to be able to share my work and what I do. And I am a native born of East Hampton. I still live and work here, so the place itself is very important to me and my work, and to be able to show a number of things that relate to this theme. I think it's kind of like a lifetime of work that's built up to this. You can a lot of people know me from drawing, but I also am very much a mixed media artist. This is actually an example of my drawing, which was from the first time I've shown here, and it was all about Forbidden Islands, and this is actually Gardener's Island. And I was thinking of myself as being a naturalist in the 19th century sense, one that they would visit faraway foreign places and try to record them for their audiences back home in, say, Europe, where the scientific establishment was recording these new places. So I thought it'd be interesting, and for this example, this is Plum Island, a place I haven't technically been, but I've visited many of these places, including Gardener's Island, and, oh, actually, I'm just gonna go back a sec. So, drawing and recording is very much a part of my practice, and it always has been. This is another project also with the Parrish I was very happy to realize in 2020 with Corinne Ernie, the Parrish Roadshow, and this is called the Bonic Blind. And this is actually a floating structure, multifaceted installation. It incorporates ideas of the vernacular architecture of the area, which might include duck blinds, which are usually for hunting. I thought it would be interesting to turn that idea on its head, as this could be a place for actually viewing wildlife. But it's also a comment on housing crisis, rising sea levels, multi kind of ideas about sustainability. it was a really interesting project to work on itself. I had the help of quite a few people, including Tucker's family, which was really great to. His brother helped me get this thing in the water. That was a lot of fun. It's about 2 tons, but it did float on Accabonac Harbor for a month and a half and weathered a number of storms. And here you can see the interior, which I try to make it as homey and comfortable as possible. There's a small library. There's something of a kind of a military cot. You can't see there's actually a hatch in the floor that you can actually access the water, say for fishing or taking a dip, whatever you want to do. But the star was really this the viewing portal, which was made from a child's jungle gym I found on the side of the road in Springs and incorporated into this floating house. And then there's plexiglass panels and kind of created almost like a nautilus. I like to think of it as 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, but this is Accabonac Harbor. And to me, that's just one of the most beautiful pieces of art in the world. So yeah, found object is also a huge kind of part of my practice. I really enjoy finding pre-made, man-made objects and reimagining them and incorporating them into these other larger bodies of work that have comments about who we are as a culture and what we're doing with our society. This is a recent piece called the Mother Morel, and actually this is on view now at Longhouse Reserve. It's a collaboration with my friend Zach Bliss, who's a artist and designer. And it's actually, conceptually, the idea is to create a standalone ecosystem. This is based on a morel mushroom, which is not only a great culinary mushroom, but they have these interesting cavities and folds in them. I'm a big wild food forager, which includes mushrooms, and I found my very first one just before we started embark on this project. So it was actually the inspiration for the form itself. And as you can see, there's plantings, and these are all native New York plants, with the idea being that this could be an ecosystem, which might include insects, birds, flora, fauna, all kinds of things in a disturbed habitat specifically. So these actually they grow in disturbed habitats or areas, which might include forest fires, so burn sites, mulch, places that have been disturbed. So conceptually, it's an interesting idea to reintroduce life into a place that might have been disturbed by human activity. I'll just talk briefly a bit about the work that's in this show, Regeneration. This is a painting called Pinus Polaris, and references a childhood friend of mine and a place that was really important to both of us in this amazing, it's actually a sculpture garden, but it has these amazing white pine trees, and it's kind of a mystical place that we would, play around in the woods, and had a lot of adventures with flashlights at night. And it also references star lore. Many cultures have star lore that relates to the white pine, which is one of my favorite trees, which also relates to this body of work, which are this is bark, and it's you can see here, these are tunnels that were created by the southern pine beetle, which is an invasive species. So I started working with the concept of native and invasive during a residency at the Watermill Center, just down the road here. And I've been thinking about the ideas of what is native and what is invasive and who arbitrates. So this is a species, unfortunately, that on the net is very negative for our forests, especially the white pine, not so much the white pine, but the pitch pine and scrub pine, and they're killing a huge amount of the trees out here. If you can see, those who know on Route 114 and in Nappy, you have like a huge devastated area that's from this burrowing insect. But I thought it was actually a very beautiful kind of aesthetic quality to the wood itself, and I think of these almost as cartographies. They represent, or even like a calligraphy, a language of this new silent invader. And these are actually prints made from the bark blocks themselves. And I actually make these as monoprints, just pressing paper into the bark surface after I've inked them. and just as a recording of not just what the activity and the labor of these insects has created, but maybe there's a new way to relate to them, especially using all of this wood that is now down on the forest floor. It's becoming part of the ecosystem, but it's also a bit hazardous in terms of forest fire risk. There's a lot of things you can talk about. This is actually the wallpaper design that was in the Bionic blind that I designed as a lot of different things. Mostly it was for fun. I think it's just a beautiful way to celebrate our local culture in a lot of ways. This one is very specific to springs and the Bionic culture again. So there's very familiar people, places, animals that are very emblematic, I think, of our region. And you'll see fishermen, and there's farmers, and ducks, and there's shells and landmarks like windmills and Ashwag Hall. So it's kind of a funny play on the idea of toile, which was created by the upper classes of Europe to ornament their lavish estates. So this is decorating my little duck blind house that's out on the marsh, and it's available in the gift shop here. Anyway, and these works are also very recent, and they kind of are ideas about specifically how organisms might live in a post-human future. I'm kind of trying to imagine a symbiotic biology wherein they might actually incorporate things like plastics and vinyls and these artificial materials that we have a huge problem with now. And I think eventually organisms like mushrooms, which are very good at adapting in an ecosystem and changing it, could eventually learn to consume things. And there actually are plastics. There are mushrooms and bacteria that do feed on plastics, which is somewhat a new revelation, and it's somewhat of a hopeful idea for our plastic crisis. So this work, Asuka, and the other one, Betula, is ideas about how these organisms might adapt in the future and what we can learn from them. I think there's a lot. I think biology is fascinating for all of those reasons. So I think my work here, especially in the show, is really, it brought together a lot of great ideas that I know I've been working with for a number of years, and it's great to see them all in one place. So thanks.
Thank you, Scott.
I'll take the clip.
And now we're going to pass it off to you, Sasha, on Zoom. Thank you. And you can just tell me when to advance.
Okay, thank you. Okay, we can go to the first slide. And I'm Sasha. I am calling in from the Netherlands right now, so it's nighttime here. But the work in the show kind of started from around right before the pandemic. I found these fish called hagfish. They are deep sea eels that excrete slime as a defense mechanism. And I ended up having 5 of them in my studio when I lived in Los Angeles, and I fell in love with them. You can go to the next slide. And I was extracting their slime for the fibers to use in my work. I was trying to make materials that would replace plastics and resin in my work by reinforcing it with these fibers that were seen as like a waste product. And I found that when I would take the fibers from them, it would the slime from them, it would stress them out. And so I started to I stopped trying to slime them, and I fell in love with them. I didn't want to stress them out. And you can go to the next slide. And they did pass away, and I was so devastated about it that I ended up tanning their skin to try to find a way to preserve them, because I still wanted to be with them. And this process is something that, like making leather from a skin or just making fish leather, is an indigenous process that is still practiced in places like Alaska, Scandinavia, northern China, but it's really something that I hadn't seen before, and it was a way for me to kind of, I was looking into fish preservation. Next slide. And so, I had this desire to just find ways to preserve fish, because I feel like we we often don't see fish living on beyond death. Next slide. And when I moved to New York, I went to grad school and I was trying to find fish skins. I was trying to source them for a piece I was making. And I found that the only place I could easily find a lot of salmon skin was upstate in near Syracuse. There's the Salmon River Fish Hatchery. And up there, the Department of Conservation basically runs this hatchery that supplies all the lakes in the region and the rivers with salmon. And the sole purpose of this hatchery is to stock the waters for sport fishing. And you can go to the next slide. And I found that this was a really strange concept to me. I didn't think about just sport fishing, hobby fishing as conservation. But what they are doing at the hatchery on the left, you can see that they are inseminating salmon into a bucket of eggs, and they fertilize all the fish that are coming back to the hatchery. So essentially, all the salmon are born in freshwater. They go to the ocean to spend most of their life, and they come back to the hatchery to spawn. They really are going back upstream to spawn, but the hatchery collects the fish, and they are manually fertilized and grown in the hatchery until they're ready to be released, and they go live their life in the ocean. And this was, as an artist, you know, it was a similar experience of trying to source. Yeah, you can go to that slide is good. Trying to source fish skins or trying to source like a material, and then something about that process becomes so much more interesting to me. So I got all these skins, but I found that just the act of what they were doing to the fish was so strange and foreign, and but also it's a whole world that is very much normalized and critical to just the ecology in the US. And you can go to the next slide. And as an artist, I'm trying to process these skins. So to tan them, we remove all the flesh from them. Next slide. And this is a tanning method that's using no chemicals. It's just egg yolks and olive oil. And you like massage the skins in this oily mixture and then hang them to dry. And they become these really beautiful, transparent, translucent materials. Next slide. And I was also thinking a lot at the time about boats and how just like boats really allowed for, yeah, just a lot of these processes to be lost because of colonization, and also just this concept of like bringing animals onto a boat and bringing two of them like in Noah's Ark, having enough to create what someone deemed as like the right, like the ideal population of an animal, whatever that may mean. It felt like a similar process to what was happening in this hatchery, where humans were determining which fish were mating with who, rather than the fish determining this. Next slide. And so the piece that is in the Parrish is related to these boats, and these are just some process photos of making it. When I was getting my MFA, I had access to a huge wood shop, so I was able to make everything there. Next slide. And these are more of the fish skin processes to make all the tan fish skins for different parts of the boat structure. Next slide. And yeah, these are some photos. And I think it's just a couple photos of these, but there's monitors with videos. Those videos are from the first time that I saw preserved fish, and I knew it was possible to hold on to a fish's body, because typically, we can do that with mammals. We have furs and leather around us all the time. And there's videos from this cruise I went on in Alaska, just like of how much care went into the boats, and also just like these crazy buffets that would be on the boats with like all this excess amount of salmon and fish. And there's also videos of me wearing fish skins from the fish that I had tanned and like wearing them on my body in the ocean. And also videos of the work I was doing in a chemistry lab, where these materials were starting to become the colors of some of the fish that I was also working with. And yeah, I'm really honored to have this piece at the Parrish, because this work was made in New York in relation to New York, and thinking about the harbor, the boats, and the fish that are moving through that are eaten, and also just our relationship to the fish. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Sasha. We'll hand it off to Tucker now.
Hello, my name is Tucker Marder. Thank you to Corinne and Scout for hosting this talk. It's really luxurious to be able to present my work. Thank you. But yeah, I figured I'd take this opportunity to talk about a project I've been working on for a while called the Folly Tree Arboretum, which in the show there's a very detailed architectural rendering of that project. It's a drawing I did 10 years ago that I just finished for the show a couple months ago. But yeah, before I got to the Arboretum, though, I wanted to take you through a couple projects that sort of represent, I don't know, how I think about or how I came to this idea of starting an Arboretum. In the past, I've worked with shrimp, flamingos, scallops, sharks, actors, and aliens. And this has always been to sort of try to develop this moving target of an exuberant environmental ethic, and sort of promote that, whatever that exactly is. And sort of, you know, thinking about art as this way to sort of confront and deal with this idea that how depressing our ecological situation is, and that, like, it doesn't, to the work that has to be done to confront it doesn't necessarily have to be dour and equally depressing, and that you could sort of enjoy it even, maybe. And so some of the projects that I've done in the past are things like, this is a project called For the Birds that happened at the National Aviary in Pittsburgh, that involved, it was a live, narrativeless, abstract live bird show that sort of took place in their Flight Zone Theater. It involved all these abstract shapes and costumes and puppets that sort of emphasized or articulated the different behaviors of the birds at the aviary. And involved this very intense training process. Yeah. And the whole thing was scored live by marimba. And that hat, a Harris hawk landed on that marimba player's hat at a very specific point in the show. Another project that was actually commissioned by the Parrish was called Stampede. And for it, I raised 250 crested Indian runner ducks and built these large abstract shapes that were actually moving puppets that referenced aerial real estate photography. So if you see that fuchsia shape in the background, that's sort of like a plot of land in perspective. And then that blue tombstone shape is mimicking these mansions, bay windows. And then that yellow shape is a flag lot. And it also housed a marimba so that the performance could be scored live by marimba. And that's what the fuchsia shape looks like on the back. We had to counterbalance it with 2,000 pounds to keep it from falling over. Like, and there's a very specific viewing vantage point. Those are the ducks. Yeah, I'm actually going to skip this project. Maybe I won't. This is called Encountering the Unseen. It's a project developed by my partner and I, Isla Hansen, where we paired microbiologists with teams of puppeteers to actualize their research. So they weren't allowed to use PowerPoint. So this is an ophthalmologist named Regis Kowalski, who was talking about the different microorganisms that affect the eye. This is Sherry Enborn, who's a microbiologist from Chatham University, talking about the gut-brain axis, where this idea that the microbes in your stomach can sort of be puppet masters in a certain way. We covered the audience in a tarp. And I'm happy to say that we might have staged one of the first theatrical fecal transplants ever. That's a human bar graph. And then lastly, this is a underwater puppet show called Rock Bottom that my partner Isla and I developed that was all these puppets were sunk in a pool in LA, and then there was a live feed from me on a scuba tank underwater, filming and puppeteering while my partner Isla was above water narrating. So it was this really funny experience where I'd do this puppet show, and I'd be like, I'd come up from the water and be like, oh my God, I hope they laughed, because I had no idea what happened during the whole show. That's the grave of Oscar the Grouch. Yeah. That's a swordfish with a penis for a nose. And then at the end, there was this really intricate, synchronized dance. Okay, what is the Folly Tree Arboretum? The Folly Tree Arboretum is a cultural archive of trees dedicated to ecological storytelling, or at least that's the sentence we have right now. And the idea is that each tree in the Arboretum has some sort of narrative behind it that captures your imagination in some way. To give you an eye of some of the examples of the trees in the Arboretum, things like we have the most charismatic conifers on Earth. A lot of weeping conifers. Picea omerica pendula bruns is one that's extremely charismatic conifer. There isn't a person who comes through the Arboretum who doesn't say like, oh, that looks like Mr. Snuffleupagus, or that looks like my grandmother, or that looks like Magnolia ashii and macrophylla that get the largest flower of any native North American tree. But also graft hybrids, 2 genetically distinct species of pine grafted onto the same stem. Hoop trees. And then sort of coming to this idea, I'm just going to check how much time I am, I'm sorry. And then trees with stories. This idea that just like a fruit or a nice flower, you could asexually propagate a tree with a story instead of a horticulturally valuable trait. So we have things like a tree that went to the moon on Apollo 14, or, I'm sorry. A tree that Hitler gave to Jesse Owens at the 1936 Olympics, or the tree that dropped the apple on Isaac Newton's head, or the tree that owns itself in Athens, Georgia, that in 1835 was deeded the 8-foot circle of property that it lives on. But yeah, we're open for tours starting on May 1st. You can go on the website and book a spot for a tour. Yeah, thank you for having me.
Thank you, Tucker. Okay. Well, so I just wanted to say thank you, everyone, for your presentations. And when I first started talking with Helen about this panel discussion and Rauschenberg's approach to ecology, you said something, Helen, that I thought was kind of spot on for so many of the artists in this show and kind of what we were thinking about for the Regeneration exhibition. You said that Rauschenberg's approach to ecology was maybe less prescriptive and somewhat more on the, you said, frequency of poetry. And I think that really speaks to the work in the show as well, which I think you all saw through the presentations. And that there's, you know, as Tucker said, what was the sentence you had? A kind of exuberance?
An exuberant ecological ethic.
Yes, that approaching something that is weighty and heavy, as our ecological concerns might be, that you can approach them through humor or bring poetry into the conversation, and that you, many of these artists aren't afraid to take on the kind of complexities and nuances of these issues and the human relationship to the non-human world. So thank you all for your presentations. I think in the interest of time, I kind of want to jump to a question that goes back to the work that you talked about, Helen. Oh, a few more Tucker slides.
There's so many.
All right, we'll get there. This is a little preview. Oh, there are a lot. Okay.
There's, I don't know.
This is great to see. So I wanted to go back to look at the Mud Muse piece, which I have a picture of, but also in our conversation, Helen, when we first started talking about this, you said something about that piece that I wrote down immediately, which was you described it as a naughty burping presence in a white cube space. And it made me think about, how do we bring conversations about the outdoors inside to traditional museum and gallery spaces? If we're thinking about the environment as this kind of entity with unpredictability and unruliness, and bringing it into these more contained and controlled spaces. Here we go. I just want to get to the Mud Muse piece so we have it in front of, there we go. Yeah. I wanted to kind of ask or pose to each of you if you see this kind of bringing your work and the kind of unpredictability of ecological systems, the kind of the roughness of your work, talking about the outdoors into the spaces as that tension. Is it a productive tension for you? Or I know many of you, I know we saw Scott's duck blind work, that's a site-specific piece or somewhat site-specific, or Tucker, you have the Folly Tree Arboretum, and that's so much a part of your work. But then you have performance as well, and you've actually talked about traveling that Folly Tree Arboretum show in a sense to bring it to other sites. So I think, to maybe pose it first to maybe you, Tucker, to talk about what do you have like a preference, or is that kind of tension between bringing the outdoors inside, is that a productive tension for you?
Yeah, I'd say it's definitely productive. I think I went to school for something called social practice, which is a fancy sounding word for like art that somehow interfaces with the world, or like considering the real world to be outside of a museum in some ways. So like I'm not always making work necessarily to be in like a gallery setting or something like that, but it's always fun to try to make it something that's easily accessible, that you don't have to go to somebody's backyard swimming pool, you don't have to go visit a specific an arboretum, but you can go to a place that's sort of puts everything in context in one place and puts it in context to other people's work is really exciting. But yeah.
And Sasha, I kind of wanted to ask you too, because I know you, in your work, you're often dealing with the kind of variability of natural systems and this kind of impossibility of recreating a natural system in your work and in a kind of controlled environment, if you wouldn't mind speaking to that as well.
Yeah, I think a lot of the research, the place that I do the research is really important to the work, but I also think that when it goes somewhere else, and the context of it does change, there are interesting dialogues that are generated by that piece being somewhere else. Like the work that is at the Parrish right now was in Los Angeles before, even though it was made in New York. And it was interesting because the fish that were actually at this hatchery, instead of them being Atlantic salmon, they were Pacific salmon. So not only were they just completely, all those salmon in that river were being stocked artificially, like mostly artificially, they were also not native to that region. So I think that these works can always, new conversations can come from them going different places.
Can I ask you a similar question, Jeremy, in terms of often your work is talking about the specificity of culturally significant sites and kind of having those photographs travel around the country and worldwide?
Sure. Yeah, this question is making me think a lot about the scrutiny that Native people deal with, and a lot of the work I'm thinking about now substitutes people or the body for the landscape. And I like that because it goes back to just a personal philosophy that being in the Northeast, we've dealt with a lot of forced assimilation and cultural erasure, and we're slowly bringing that all back. But in the meantime, our connection to the landscape is what keeps us unique and different and indigenous. And I think one of the ecological ties within that is the idea that whenever there's a native site or a native place that's identifiable, it always has to be identified through destruction or change. So usually there's a new house that's being built and someone digs 7 feet in the ground, and that's usually the only time that there is that acknowledgement or connection. And so we often have to deal with that possibility, but at the same time, when there is sensitivity and when people do think of us before digging, it's usually our suggestion to use like ground penetrating radar. And in the 3 pieces that I have at the Parrish, it is dealing with that same topic of how do you depict something that you can't see or you can't access, and you kind of have to believe that it's there. And so I do like that idea of indigenous stewardship, kind of letting nature take over without a trace of humanity. And that's something that is really hard to accomplish on the East End.
Scott, in terms of your work and working both creating work for maybe more traditional museum gallery spaces, but then you also work often site specifically as well. Do you have a kind of preference between working between the two, or are they sort of two parts of a broader?
Yeah, I really love both aspects. Not that I'm like schizophrenic, but I really do have these like very kind of different modes of working where a lot of the more careful, considered, fragile work is, more suitable for an interior space. And then I like to completely break out of that and then work 3-dimensionally and create installations and even, work with living materials that can live outside or anywhere. And I love the idea of even going in between that. As much as a museum creates this context for any given work, it's equally amazing to see work that's outside in a living environment too. I love both.
So I think in the interest of time, I'm going to end on this question. So maybe we have a little bit of time for audience Q&A. But this is a note that I actually saw when we went to the Parrish went to the Robert Rauschenberg Foundation. You had this on display. And in part of our conversation, too, around Rauschenberg was this idea of activism and the role of activism in Rauschenberg's work, and that you spoke about, Helen, the kind of adjacency he had to ecological and social issues, but that he wouldn't have considered himself an activist artist per se, or in those strict terms, perhaps. But I just want to read this note from 1976 that I think is very apt. So, artists have always been the first to respond worldwide to the needs of others, whether it be earthquakes, starving children, sinking Venice, or political atrocities. If the United States does not recognize and support their artists in this role, then the United States has begun, maybe innocently or ignorantly, a form of suppression of the very vehicle that carries the communication and culture of times down through the ages. Art has always been a necessary ally to justice and freedom. So, clapping for Rauschenberg there. Helen, I'm wondering if you do know any context for this note. I wasn't able to find any online. Do you know? 1976.
Not immediately, but this was the year of the bicentennial, and and he was selected as the artist to celebrate the bicentennial and had a retrospective at the American Art Museum in DC. And in terms of the exact moment at this time, it might have been early NEA. But regardless, this is very much the sentiment that he adhered to, and he always acknowledged artists as the class that were the first to kind of go in an authoritarian regime, or that were targeted precisely because their voices were so uncontrollable or unaccountable, and that they could address issues in this creative way that escaped all expected routes, and you see that in his approach to technology. And I would love to hear all of you speak to how you approach this, which is kind of looking at things sideways, or using tools, materials, methods in the wrong way, and through that experimentation, arriving at new solutions and greater possibilities. So it's kind of like, I mean, it's so trite nowadays, thinking out of the box, and even that concept, which has been appropriated by big business and industry, comes originally from artistic creativity. And it's the thought that all of these milestones were reached and exceeded by this creative excess, and that I think Rauschenberg adhered to the idea that it remained in the artist's domain because he could see that happening. He could see the appropriation of this energy by corporate interests, and he could see that wouldn't be possible. That artists will always remain outside of this regime, and I see it in the work of all of you that it's pushing the boundaries. And I love how in the case of the duck line, you were like, this is a child's jungle gym, when an art person might come in and be like, that's a geodesic dome, and you adhered to the material origin of that form, and so yeah, let me kick it back.
I like that we're using the words unruly and uncontrollable, both in terms of the environment and artists. Actually, it's an interesting parallel.
One would hope. Let's hope that that's.
But I sort of wanted to pose this question to our artists as a closing question, to think about we talked about this a little bit, about the role of activism in your work, or as adjacent to your work, or another branch of your work. How important that distinction is for you, or the kind of responsibility of an artist, or is there a kind of, as Helen, we were talking about, an irresponsibility that's perhaps more useful? Tucker, you seem ready.
I can say something about that. I think. I think sometimes I get a little queasy around the association of art and activism. Sometimes it makes me a little uncomfortable, because when I don't think it's always appropriate or necessary to expect solutions and answers from artists, that their activism is often solution based, and that there are lots of noble people undertaking amazing activism, and art is different, I think, and that it's not necessarily the artist's responsibility always to be solution oriented, although there's nothing wrong with making art about solutions, but this idea that artists are not scientists, they're not activists, they're something else. If that makes any sense.
Thank you.
Well, I like that answer a lot, actually, because I would agree a lot with that. And I wouldn't say artists are necessarily scientists or activists, but they could be that. And my approach is totally about cross-pollination. I think a lot of my work comes from combining different worlds that not necessarily have gone together, and I just love weaving things together. Maybe in a unique way. And again, I wouldn't say that I have answers, but I have ideas. And I think maybe that's more important, because I'm totally against isms. No, I think that's a very 20th century idea. So no ideology, just ideas.
Jeremy or Sasha, would you like to add anything?
You can go ahead, Sasha.
I was just gonna say, I've been thinking about that question, and I've been a lot about I feel like there's not as much support for for artists right now, and I've just been thinking a lot about like community and spaces for artists to come together. And I feel like Tucker really, in his work and in Folly Tree, really embodies that, where he creates space for artists to come together. He did mention that he has a residency, but I met some really amazing people. Actually, I met Scott and Tucker at he had a gathering for the residents that were at Folly Tree. But I think spaces like that, being able to kind of like, you know, use your studio as a space to bring people in, those are kind of ways that I see another form of, you could call it activism, but I really think, yeah, kind of just like being an artist, really, you look at the world differently. And it is just really about like continuing to be able to do that and to find outlets to share your work in the way that you think.
I was just going to add, yeah, I didn't know about this node, and I know that Rauschenberg believed in the power of art to bring about social change. And yeah, Sasha said it's troublesome to look at the news and the politics and how on a national stage and local level, how the arts, whether it's funding or institutions, are either being defunded or censored, and even museum spaces are being dictated, what can be shown and what can be on the program. So I think it is appropriate that it's 1976. This note is putting into question the same thing we're asking today, even more urgent now. But I think as an artist, going back to the founding of the country and the ideals that the nation was founded on, it's always good to you go back to those moments, because as artists, we're always wondering those big life questions of like, what are we all here for? What's worth fighting for? And what are we making art about? And so I'm thinking a lot about that in 2026, just the idea of the contradictions that we had in the beginning, starting this country, and how it is kind of hard to, I think as BIPOC or Indigenous artists, we do want to make work that celebrates happiness and freedom and our dreams, but it is hard to do that when there is injustice. So I think that relates a lot to what Rauschenberg is writing in this note.
Thank you, Jeremy.
Thank you. And just to add to that, and I think that all of your work speaks to this as well, Rauschenberg really emphasized the importance of communication in art, and that it's one node that is inherently cross-disciplinary, especially when you're looking at other fields. So that, especially in our deepening paths of specialization, where people are so entrenched in their tiny little pasture of solving big problems, that you miss the bigger picture. And and when I say communication, sometimes it's miscommunication, right? But intentionally so, that by telling the story the wrong way or presenting something that might be a little bit off, but that inspires the inquiring mind, that inspires the viewer to say, what is the real science here? Like, what is the real story here? What is the real history that this kind of moment of artistic fiction is opening up for me? And that it then compels people, which is not the artist's responsibility, right? That the artwork is the starting point to inspire further research in viewers to get to the greater truth. And that's when like the public discourse aspect comes in, that you start these larger conversations of, I saw this artwork, it led me to learn about this, and here's the bigger picture, and you create kind of these affinity groups of people who are like, oh, I want to dig deeper into this, and I want to get to the bottom of this or the top of this, and we start weaving together all of the knowledge that the world otherwise alienates us from. And it's this communicative drive in art that in the best of circumstances might cure us of this alienation.
It's about asking questions rather than delivering answers. So thank you so much, everyone. I think in the thank you. In the interest of time, I think we'll move out into the lobby for the reception. And if you have questions for our artists or panelists, please ask them then. But thank you so much, everyone, for being here today. Thank you to our panelists here and on Zoom. And thanks for joining us. Oh. There is a New York Times article that came out today about the Parrish USA 250 exhibition and Regeneration more specifically. So thank you all for being here.